some of the constructive comments that some of our guests have made and some of our viewers have made.
Okay. And when I get the laptop going.
Yeah. No, we won't do it now.
But
hey, hey, people, anyone there watching yet? Are you there, buddy?
Yeah.
Cool.
I'm just going to turn this light off. This room's too dark.
I can see you now.
Yeah, just get this going better this way. We're live, are we?
Yeah, we're live, buddy, and we've got one viewer. And I'm just going to say hey to whoever's out there. Hey there. Hey, people from around the world who are watching either this live or the rerun. But thanks for joining Carl and I. I'm particularly interested in this episode because Carl is going to tell us about Bob Dylan and why Bob Dylan is a key component to the Stones and their development. But before we do that, we should, I suppose, say g'day to Carl. Is he there? Where is he?
Yeah, hi.
Oh, there he is.
Hello, world.
Yeah, there he is. Hey, man.
Cool. Rocking and rolling.
What's been happening?
Oh, personal level, you're helping Edric and Amy move tomorrow from the town to the country.
Oh, you're such a good person.
Yeah, well, what else do? You can't say no.
For our North American friends and our English friends, it's winter here in New Zealand. So the town that Carl and I live in was -2 last night. So that's pretty cold.
Yes, I see.
I see.
I see.
So, mate, kick it off. Tell us why Dylan is important.
Well, just some of the stuff I've researched and read through the years, being a a Stones fan and everything. Dylan was a intelligent songwriter, so he actually constructed songs like an art form. He pieced together certain things, and a lot of people don't know this. He was the first rapper of all time. There was a song that he, is it Buick, something Buick? And it was a rap song, 1965. But around 1966, or 65, 66, Brian Jones started to hang out with Bob Dylan. And Bob Dylan respected Brian Jones because of his musicianship. And there was a famous, I think the power went out or something in New York City, and they all jammed in a hotel room. And Brian and Bob hung out, and then it ensued that Bob and Mick and Keith kind of got friendly as well, and it very much heavily influenced their songwriting on at least Mick Jagger's singing style on the album Between the Buttons, namely Who's Been Sleeping Here. So Bob Dylan was a very much a key component in not only the Rolling Stones songwriting, but that American English hippie counterculture movement in the 60s because of his songwriting abilities. I mean, we talked about Jimi Hendrix before, about Jimi Hendrix guitar playing, but Jimi Hendrix was extremely influenced and motivated. I mean, it's as evidence with All Along the Watchtower with Bob Dylan's songwriting. So that's something that we've got Bob to thank for is intelligent lyrics, thinking man's lyrics, poetry, not just pop songs, but he made you want to listen.
So, I agree with you, and I think what we need to do is locate Dylan back to that folk music scene that he escaped home from to follow, didn't he? There's some parallels there between him and Mike Bloomfield. You know, Bob came from a pretty wealthy family. I think it's been a while since I've read something about Dylan, but was he 16 when he left home to go and follow Pete Seeger and Arlo Guthrie and those guys? He was quite young, wasn't he?
Yeah, I just know him from Minnesota. That was his hometown, the state at least, and a huge Woody Guthrie fan. Massive.
Woody Guthrie. That's it. Woody Guthrie. That's yeah. So he hung out with Woody, who in itself was a legend. But I'm going to articulate the Thinking Man's lyrics that you've said and that artistic ability back to the social conscience bedrock that he had when he was hanging out with these guys, because they were singing about the grapes of wrath. They were singing about the lives of the poor, the rural poor, and the fair deal and everything else that was and not happening in America at the time. So that didn't just fall from the sky for Dylan, did it? You know, it was built on something, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think Dylan's first album came out in '62, and it's part of that that New York Greenwich Village scene.
So why was he so important then in '62 with that album? What?
It was a combination of lots of things. The singing style, the nasally voice, the imagery of a guy kind of almost like a hitchhiker with his guitar and his bag. He was just a mysterious guy. I think he was very mysterious.
I listened to that album again last year before Christmas, mate, and I listened to it right through. And as you and I know, when we try and listen to some songs, it's important for us to put time aside and listen to the whole album. But I remember listening to that first album, and I remember thinking, my gosh, this is an angry album. It's angry.
Yeah, absolutely. He was definitely one of those guys that was very intelligent, very well read. He wasn't. He's exactly what record companies did not want, you know, because he wasn't prepared to write pop songs and catchy singles, but for some reason he made it work. He sold albums.
Can't see you, buddy. I've lost you.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Now you're back.
I'm just changing where I'm located because I've just got the light flashing. But
so he was a rock and roll rebel.
Pretty much. He was a guy that was like the Rolling Stones, and that's probably why Bob Dylan liked the Stones. He was a guy that didn't compromise. He had his own way of doing things, which was
Keith doesn't say much. Doesn't say nice things about Brian Jones and that first meeting that he had with with Bob Dylan. I think that was their first tour or something like that, maybe. And Brian snuck off, and in Keith's book he talks about that's the time when Brian discovered acid.
Right.
He was taking acid, and he talks about how Brian thought that by him taking acid, he was intellectually superior to everybody else because everyone else was smoking pot or taking uppers.
Yes.
And yeah, it's interesting how Keith perceived that more than anything about Brian's first meeting with Bob Dylan.
Yeah, well, Bob Dylan was there's a couple of things that Bob Dylan did. He wrote a song which was supposed to be about Brian Jones, was definitely influenced by the presence of Brian Jones, called Ballad of a Thin Man. And Bob Dylan would tease Brian about his paranoia. So there was definitely a little bit of what's the word? A little bit of ribbing going on.
So how did Brian? How did Dylan know that Brian was paranoid? Was it through their drug sessions that he discovered or sensed his paranoia?
I think so. Yeah, just through. I think probably Bob Dylan would have been an outlet to Mick and Keith being so tight and clever songwriters. Brian probably needed another buddy to kind of like to confide with, and Bob Dylan was that guy for a short period of time.
So why didn't he go away and write some songs from that experience then? Gosh.
I don't know. Yeah, no. They had an interesting friendship. I mean, and as I said last week, Bob Dylan, who was, very, as mysterious as he was definitely very cocksure of himself. He said, I could have written Satisfaction, but you could have never written Mr. Tambourine Man. So Bob Dylan was a heavyweight. He may have not sold the records the Stones did, but he was definitely held in high regard as basically a consummate musician, which was a songwriter, singer, band leader, revolutionarist. As we all know, he turned the world upside on its head when he went from acoustic to electric. So,
well, I take my hat off to Bob Dylan, because he put his money where his mouth was. Just like Brian Jones, he left home.
Yeah.
With basically his guitar.
That's it. He lived that lifestyle like a blues man. A lot of people don't know this. Those first albums, there was a lot of blues covers on there. He did a version of House of the Rising Sun in '62, and that came out, and with the Animals did it in '65 and made it the hit song. There's a lot of nuggets that Bob did. I mean, and every album he did was a concept album. It was totally different to the last. He did your folk album. He did a bit of a blues album. He did obviously a live album. He was very much tight with a lot of the New York musicians. He had the band backing him. He did everything.
Wow.
There was nothing for him to play solo. He could roll up to a show just having his guitar and a harmonica. And he was one of the first guys to have what they call as a rack. Which is
this thing. This thing.
Yeah.
Really?
A rack for your harmonica.
Who was Bob Dylan was?
Yeah. So Neil Young had the rack. Mick DeVille had the rack. But he was one of the first guys to play the guitar, sing, and play harmonica all at the same time.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. I thought that was relatively... Wow, okay.
Well, from a Jimmy Reed or a blues perspective, it's pretty common. But as far as modern day, for lack of a better word, white folk rock or rock in general, it wasn't really that widely used. No one had the talent or at least the motive to use it. You had, I mean, to a lesser extent, what's his name used it, the Columbia record guy's son, John Hammond. I don't know if you remember John Hammond, but Bob was the guy that basically was a huge influence on all singer, songwriter, folk singer, blues, everything, you name it. Neil Young, Jimi Hendrix, Eagles, list goes on and on. And then, I mean, as we know, Rolling Stones paid tribute to Bob in their 2004 tour. Was that 40 Licks? And then one of their encore songs was Like a Rolling Stone.
Oh, and they recorded that in their 94 album, Stripped.
The Strip, was it? Yeah. Which suits the band, obviously.
Oh, gee, they did a good version of it. It blew me away.
Yeah.
It's outstanding.
Absolutely. So, and we've talked about album covers before. A lot of people don't know this either. So the band's first album, one of the most famous album covers of all time, was Bob Dylan painted. So he's got his fingers in everything.
So what songs directly are attributed, you think, to a Bob Dylan influence with the Stones?
Good question. All I know is the famous stories behind Bob Dylan and their songs with the drug bust in Redlands. when the police came crashing down and they knocked on the door, the police came in and everybody was flying high, and the radio was playing. Keith's radio was playing "Everybody Must Get Stoned," which is a Bob Dylan song. So I don't know which song indirectly they've tried to copy, but I'm pretty sure that album "Blonde on Blonde" was a big influence, huge influence, massive. Because Blonde on Blonde came out '66. Between the Buttons came out '66. So that's almost kind of like a little bit of like their Bob Dylan album, I think.
And Rubber Soul.
Yeah, exactly. So if Black and Blue was the Stones' reggae album, I think Between the Buttons would have been their take on trying to be Bob Dylan. Backstreet Girl, Who's Been Sleeping Here, She Smiled Sweetly, Complicated, possibly even Ruby Tuesday. So just trying to capture, trying to write clever lyrics instead of writing pop songs, which are just throwaway. I think Bob Dylan taught us all, taught the music world, that these songs were, like poetry. They were intended to be written to stay, not to throw away. A pop song is disposable. So
yeah, well, I'm just looking here. So Bob Dylan, the first album, you're right, came out in '62, and then there's a couple of other albums that have been re-releases in the Freewheeling Bob Dylan in '63.
Yeah.
But the album that I particularly, and then you've got Highway 61 and 65, Blonde on Blonde in '66.
Yeah.
John Wesley Harding in '67. Jeepers, they're awesome albums, aren't they?
Absolutely. And as you know, '67 was the start of obviously the Jimi Hendrix, the Doors, the Jefferson Starship. That was a monumental heavyweight album for that heavy rock acid period. All Along the Watchtower. What a clever song. What a moving song. I mean, where does he find those lyrics about castles and paupers and preachers, and it's amazing.
Well, this is the album that I
Nashville Skyline,
particularly, yeah, that's the one that
album.
Yeah, that's my album. I when I think of Bob Dylan, that's the album I automatically think of.
That's an incredible album. It's got a Johnny Cash tribute. Johnny Cash sings a song on there.
Girl from the North Country.
That's right. And when you look at that album, Big Hits, High Tide, Green Grass, and you see Keith playing that big jumbo Gibson acoustic, that's all Bob Dylan inspired, So Bob was like, with the black shades on, he would have walked into a room and just commanded attention and respect. He was just, even the Stones would have sat down while he stood up. He was just that sort of guy. A musician's musician.
So on Beggar's Banquet, you've got a couple of country songs.
Doctor?
There's a couple of songs on Beggar's Banquet that I always thought were Bob Dylan-ish inspired songs.
Yep. Yep, that sounds about right. Dear Doctor.
Yep.
What's the other one? Salt of the Earth.
Factory Girl.
Factory Girl, very much so, yes. And when they bring out the fiddle.
Yeah. I never really sort of thought much about Bob Dylan and how obviously to the Stones until you mentioned it, and I did give it a bit of thought over the week, but definitely a giant, isn't he? And he's still touring, incidentally, isn't he?
Absolutely. And a lot of people don't know this, that Bob Dylan, more people have become famous off Bob Dylan songs than Bob Dylan did himself of his own songs. Brian Ferry and David Bowie, a whole bunch of these guys did Bob Dylan songs.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I'll get a quick list.
Hey, Simon. Thanks for jumping on board and saying g'day. Carl and I are just talking about Bob Dylan and his influence with the Stones. So, we're good. We're all good, mate. It must be early over there in England. What would it be? 8:30 in the morning over in England? Are you back, buddy?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm just chatting to a couple of guys in the chat. Simon from England says g'day to us.
Awesome. So here we go. Here's some songs that Bob Dylan's wrote that other people have covered. Obviously, All Along the Watchtower, Jimi Hendrix, Ballad of Easy Rise of the Byrds, Forever Young. I think Rod Stewart did that. It Ain't Me, Babe.
Yes, he did.
It Ain't Me, Babe, the Turtles. Mr. Tambourine Man, We Know the Birds did a great version of that.
Well, Simon's saying Albert Grossman had Peter, Paul and Mary do Blowing in the Wind.
That's right. They did that. They did a big song, yes.
That was a famous song. I think that was like, what was it? They made it. It was like a popular pop music type of version song, number 2 or number 3 in the charts or something.
Yeah. Here's another one that's huge. That I love. It's All Over Now, Baby Blue.
By Graham Bonnet.
Yeah, 13th Floor Elevators did. But yeah, beautiful song. Blowing in the Wind, like you're right. Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. Eric Clapton did a version of that, didn't he?
And he's done a couple of Bob Dylan songs.
Oh, it's beautiful. I Shall Be Released. That beautiful song. It's like a prison song. It's actually one of my favorite the band songs, Bob Dylan song, which is probably the highlight of that DVD, The Last Waltz, at the end.
That the Bob Dylan song that I know that Clapton did. Is it Sign Language?
I don't know. I'll have a look.
I think it.
And here we go.
Yeah, here it is. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
You speak to me. You're taking advantage.
Yeah, that's definitely a Bob Dylan song.
And who did this one here? You're going to have to guess the singer. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door.
Lots of versions. Cold Chisel, the Australian band, did a very good version. Our mate Axel.
Aye.
Clapton.
Oh, really? Oh, that's right. Late 70s. He actually he got a #1 out of that, didn't he?
Oh, gee, I don't know. He got a #1 out of the Bob Marley song, "I Shot Sheriff." I don't know. Don't know. I don't know. You can't answer that question, mate.
And here's an interesting lady who I really like, Joan Baez. She made a whole career out of Bob Dylan songs.
Yeah. Well, they were together there for a while, weren't they?
Tears of Rage. The times are changing. So yeah, it's the Black Crowes did a whole bunch of Bob Dylan songs. The list goes on and on. So I'll shut this down. Jeff Buckley was a big fan. Solomon Burke, R.L. Burnside, The Byrds, Paul Butterfield. Just goes on and on. He's huge. Glenn Campbell, the country artist. So what Bob Dylan taught us as well is he was just a reservoir of lyrics. He had a vault of songs. He was a machine.
What I like about him too is the way that he would sing some words and lines, like he would give it a twist.
Yes,
like he wouldn't sing it the way that anyone else would normally sing some words. And for a long time, I didn't like that style, but as you get a bit older, you appreciate it. Yeah. So what do you think of some? Like, I remember Jokerman came out.
Oh, great album, mid-80s.
Earlier mid-80s, and man, that song was huge. It was I think that was a #1.
Yeah, my uncle, I bought that album back from my uncle, and don't know what happened to it. But Jokerman, Dance to the Light of the Moon, blah, just a great song. I remember that because this is in the days when you had MTV, and it was actually pretty cool. You had Bruce Springsteen, and you had all these great video clips. But he had a video attached to that, didn't he?
Yeah.
And it was playing every weekend on New Zealand TV. It was such a good song, big song. Here's a great song, and this is actually quite a spiritual song. And you can say this to anybody, anytime, whether you be your boss or a billionaire or anybody, you've got to serve somebody. He had some pretty...
Maybe we should tell our politicians that too.
Yeah. Absolutely. I just can't believe, I'm just looking at some of these songs by other artists, and wow. I think it's Subterranean Homesick Blues was the first ever rap song.
Sonia's just jumped in the chat to say g'day to us. So she's saying, hey, Carl. So g'day, Sonia. I don't know where Sonia's from. I know that Simon's from England.
Yeah.
So maybe find.
And here's, as we know, Joe Cocker made a career out of Beatles songs, but he also he's a great guy at covering. He would have probably been the sort of guy you go to the pub, and he would have basically probably just, what's the word? He would have hovered and he would have been around that karaoke machine and probably, but he did that song called Just Like a Woman. What a clever lyric that was. Just like a woman, but you break like a little girl. Clever.
So she's from West Texas.
Oh, wow.
Where you used to live.
Yeah, West Texas, that's cowboy country.
Cowboy country.
Oh, absolutely. One of my favourite Rod songs, which I thought was Bob Dylan wrote this, but you would have heard this. It's a sad song, Mama, You've Been on My Mind. I think it was a Faces or a Rod Stewart song, but just what, yeah. I don't think Bob gets the credit he deserves.
So what do you think people were so upset when he went to elect? And he's been booed by people, and they're interviewing people who've gone to his concert in England. You know, he's playing in London, and people are just walking out just saying that he's sold out.
I think he'd amassed such a cult beatnik, folk, hippie, college campus cult following that going electric was just almost like throwing it all away, like almost going commercial. You know, I mean, here's our hero turning folk into rock. What is this?
So the electric guitar was associated with popular music, and the acoustic, the protest, student youth movement, and by him assuming a new instrument, that signified a betrayal to them.
Yeah. I mean, I know that Royal Albert Hall concert was the '66 was quite famous, eh? But I think they finally got over it. You know, but he was just growing as an artist. He had the Hawks, which turned out to be the band backing him. And then if these, you know, and just that's the way that music was going. It was getting bigger and more electric, and Bob was the sort of guy that probably wanted to be heard more. It's hard to play acoustic to 20,000 people, isn't it? You can play acoustic in a small club to 50 people, but he probably wanted to be heard more too.
Well, I think in some kind of interesting way, he wanted to be part of what he could see was a movement for change, you know, because that's what he had been involved with right from 1962 or beforehand, wasn't he? He was part of that protest movement, and then he could see that the young people were adopting rock and roll as their music, rock and roll anthems for social change. So they thought maybe they thought maybe he could make some change by being in the pop music scene.
Well, I tell you what, if you can't beat him, join him. You know, he's an intelligent guy, a clever guy. I mean, for lack of a better word, let's call him a prophet. One of those guys that could see the future, you know, or at least envision it. You know, he was at all these folk concerts on the Vanguard label, and he was with, you know, Skip James and all those guys, and he could see. I mean, even Muddy Waters is going electric. He started out acoustic, so a part of him was probably emulating his blues heroes. The guys that he loved in Chicago, the Slide Players, the Howling Wolves, the Blind Willie McTell, Blind Willie Johnson, Son House. A lot of these guys are getting a bit more electric. So, yeah. Here's another song. Here's another nugget. UB40. I'll be your baby tonight. What would UB40 without that song? I mean, and getting back to Nashville Skyline, how many times we heard Lay Lady Lay and you never get sick of it?
Well, Sonia's in the chat saying, didn't Bob Dylan stick with the acoustic most of his career? Well, no. He's there's a lot of albums there that are electric, aren't there?
Yes. He would have. he's the sort of guy, typical artist, very restless. He would have gone back and forth a lot. I mean, in 1979, Atlantic Records didn't want to even know him because he did a gospel album called Saved. And Jerry Wexler was a hardened atheist and said, I don't want to hear your Jesus rant. What's happened, Bob? Bob said, by hook or by crook, I'm releasing this album. Unfortunately, wasn't a commercial success, but Bob was Bob.
Well, absolutely.
Which is the sign of a good artist. We mentioned this word many a time. Not compromising, sticking to their roots, not selling out, having authenticity, singing and writing from the heart, telling the audience what's going on. Almost like the anti-politician.
Well, another artist that comes to my mind who's stuck to his guns, that Neil Young.
Absolutely. Of the last 15 years, he's been a bit too political, but you're right. They get, they believe in a cause. They do. But yeah, Bob's been a friend of ours for a long time, hasn't he? And he even put up with Mick and Keith in that terrible Live Aid in '85 with out-of-tune guitars. Remember that? Apparently, I just read the reviews. I've seen it once or twice, but apparently it's pretty terrible.
Yeah, but he did well though with Tom Petty. Remember, they're in the late '80s. They got together and toured, didn't they?
So he was part of the Travelling Wilburys, eh?
Well, that was the lead up to the Travelling Wilburys.
Oh wow!
They went on a tour together. The Heartbreakers backed up Bob Dylan, and it was from that experience that they went on to produce and record the Travelling Wilburys.
Wow,
fantastic album.
The Travelling Wilburys did a total of 2 albums. Is that right?
Yeah, the first I know the first one really well.
So we had Tom Petty, George Harrison, Roy Orbison, basically the cream of the cream.
What's the second album?
It's still got the same guys, but not quite as well known. I don't think it was a big hit. Here's a good song, and this is what put Brian Ferry on the map. A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. So this guy's just a heavyweight. Absolute heavyweight.
She's My Baby. Okay, yeah, you're right. So the first album came out in '88. The Travelling Wilburys, Handle with Care. Yep. And then a couple of years later, they came out with one. So Sonia's saying that she grew up listening to Zappa, Sabbath, The Stones, Deep Purple, Beatles, and Traffic. Nothing wrong with that.
Good.
Simon's back saying g'day. So that's good. And we've got a couple of people watching us, so that's always good.
Yep. And it's just incredible. And I read about this the other day. I think this song was on All Along the Watchtower. The voice asked Judas Priest, where did you get your name for your band from? Here's something. Bob Dylan wrote a song called The Ballad of Frankie Lee and Judas Priest.
What album's that on?
All Along the Watchtower. So, yeah. So Judas Priest got their name of their band from the Bob Dylan song.
Yeah, that's right. Simon, right. The second album's Volume 3. That's correct.
And another. I'm just scrolling down all these songs. I mean, another amazing song, Tangled Up in Blue. Just.
I remember when I was doing some research when I started playing open G tuning.
Yes.
I remember there was a whole album, and I'll tell you the album, that's all played in open D or open A tuning, and it's Blood on the Tracks.
I was just going to mention that album. That's
Tangled Up in Blue. Yeah. So that whole album is all recorded in open tuning.
Did not know that, and that is when they talk about Bob Dylan's 10 best albums. That's like number 2 or 3. It's a huge album. It's once again the Bob Dylan the artist. There was a when they released the album, there was about 100,000 copies that had a mural on the back cover, and then they put it back to the original cover. That's Bob Dylan's painting, but once again, a huge album. They call it the breakup album, apparently, to do with losing a girl.
So the Rolling Stones then, we've identified a couple of songs that we think are directly influenced by Bob Dylan with Beggar's Banquet.
Yes.
And then would you associate any of the other country songs like Country Honk and songs like that? Would you say that it's necessarily a Bob Dylan influence or just a country influence? Or
probably a bit of both. I think that from an in-depth songwriting point of view, it would have really helped shape Mick and Keith's songs. Being Mick and Keith, they probably wouldn't admit it, but deep down we know that that Bob was a huge influence. Definitely a influence in the way Mick sings. That is a fact. That how Bob sung, Mick tried to sing a little bit like that. And also the fact that Bob was willing to try different genres at ease and at will, and the Stones did that. And let's face it, I mean, you mentioned Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed. Those 2 albums are heavily soaked in acoustic guitars. And that would have been a big Bob Dylan influence, you know.
Simon's just answering what you said about Tangled Up, Blood on the Tracks. It's that album's a reflection of his divorce from Sarah Dylan.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So interesting that these guys they're basically bearing their soul. They're not. Are we there? Hello? Andrew? Hello, Andrew? Andrew?
Is that you, Carl?
Yes.
So okay.
We back?
Gosh, I feel like swearing, but I won't. Yeah, okay. Sorry about that, guys. Arse end of the world, first world bullshit here in New Zealand. Sorry. Okay. Right. I suppose, mate, we can probably. Do you want to wrap up?
Yeah. I got a big day tomorrow, but we still got a good 50 minutes in. Amazing how it goes by so quick.
Okay, so Mark Cassidy has jumped in, and sorry, Mark, we've missed you because of our technical difficulties here. So, have you ever listened to Dylan's Street Legal? Have you heard that album?
I know of it. I haven't personally listened to it.
Is that worth checking out, Mark? Well, is Mark here? Hi, Mark. So Simon's saying, hi, Mark. It's one of his favourite Dylan albums too. So if Simon's saying it's a good album, we should check it out.
Street Legal, absolutely. Let's have a look.
Yeah, it's his album After Desire. Ah, okay.
1978.
Ah, okay. So here we go. Street Legal 78. Changing of the Guards, New Pony. Is Your Love in Vain? Senor, okay. Okay, I need to check that out. Yeah, we need to check it out. Cool.
Oh, I can imagine Dylan is a bit like, well, he's a lot like the Stones and your Neil Young and such a body of work, and he's still going.
I didn't see him when he came here a couple of years ago. I had a couple of friends who went and saw him, and they were quite disappointed because he wasn't singing the hits. He only sung the songs he wanted to sing.
There's two guys that do that. I'll quiz you on this, and you probably know it. If you don't know it, well, I've just found out about it because I haven't seen the shows, but just through. So Bob Dylan will do one show. He'll do what the crowd, and other shows he'll be like, I don't care what you guys think. I'm going to play my whole album, my new album from back to front, start to finish. Neil Young does the same thing.
So you don't know what you're going to get.
Absolutely. So most bands, the Stones in particular, well, all these bands they'll promote, let's say they'll promote Voodoo Lounge 94. So they'll do a couple of Out of Control and whatever other songs are on there, 2 or 3. And then they'll have to do their hits because the crowd expects it. So they'll do Jumping Jack Flash and Honky Tonk Woman and Satisfaction as the encore. Every time, guaranteed. But the band, the crowd expects it, and the Stones just go through the motions. Where Bob Dylan, I mean, he's telling everybody, "Hey, this is my show, not your show. You've come to see me. I haven't come to see you. This is my new album, and I like it.
I love it."
So I imagine deep down he appreciates his fans, but he's not one of these guys that I don't think he's in it for the money. I mean, obviously he likes the money, but I think he's in it for, you know, that's his craft. That's like a wood carver with his chisels. That's his craft.
Well, Mark's saying that we should check out his No Time to Think from that album as well. So the rhyming he also says on that album is incredible. So I'm going to have something to eat, and I'm going to put that album on, and I'll get back to you, Mark, and let you know what I think of the album. I always appreciate a heads up.
Awesome.
So what's the show on Sunday?
Are we live still?
Yeah. The show on Sunday is
greatest unknown riffs from the Stones, or I don't know. I mean,
well, I'm going to pick a couple of riffs that I think that I particularly love, and talk about them. There won't be any surprises, I suppose. I'm going to talk about the riffs that hooked me and still do.
Yep. Absolutely. And once again, we talked about Bob Dylan, the body of work, such a huge body of work with the Rolling Stones. Summarising, I think that Bob Dylan would have taught the Stones, like I said before, stick to your guns, because Bob Dylan has always been quite blues based. That's part of his foundation. So I think that, and we've talked about this before, that during the Pacemakers and who are I don't know, a lot of these British bands that just kind of fell by the wayside. And you mentioned Rubber Soul. They didn't go to the Bob Dylan school of writing songs. Let's write about stuff that's tantamount to the time we're in. The marching and the fighting and the war and the way the times are changing.
Oh, and in particular in the Beatles, they wrote a lot of their songs about, love, didn't they, too? About they were always optimistic about what was happening. There was, getting up, waking up,
yep,
looking out the window, seeing the sun, great.
John Lennon did a song about being on the bus in Liverpool. Famous song.
Mm-hmm.
Quirky. Getting back to, you mentioned Rubber Soul. Revolver would have been a huge influence Bob Dylan album, correct? Or is that more Beatles coming into their own?
Well, I don't know. The experts always say it was Rubber Soul.
Yeah.
Because that was the Weird album, and then the acid album for the Beatles was Revolver. So,
okay.
I don't know. I suppose that's the great thing about having these shows, and we can go back and listen to them, and with a new set of ears because of what we're talking about. But I think if there's one thing that Bob Dylan can give young people today, and it's not necessarily an artistic lesson, but certainly one where you need to be true to your art as an artist. Don't get pushed around by your management or the record companies.
Yeah, I mean, Bob Dylan obviously had great albums, but besides Blowing in the Wind and Mr. Tambourine Man, he didn't really have number one songs, did he?
Well, yeah. So, and again, thanks. Simon's pointing out something wonderful here, and I'm going to kick myself for missing it. Rubber Soul has Norwegian Wood, which is definitely an influence, of course. It's well known that it is, and Hide Your Love Away. Yeah, absolutely. You couldn't get more Bob Dylan-y than those songs.
Yeah. The acoustic and the lyrics and the singing style.
And that's because John Lennon wanted to get away from talking about "I Want to Hold Your Hand."
Yeah, absolutely. And John was a thinking man. He was a very much a introvert, wasn't he? Coming off the stage, he was a very well-read individual who's concerned about what was going on. He was very much anti-war, anti-establishment.
Wrote a couple of books on poetry.
Yeah. So yes. Bob Dylan is very much an integral part of that '60s. I wouldn't say swinging movement, but definitely that counterculture rock um, anti-establishment movement, and a testimony to Bob Dylan and his strength. A lot of those bands, the Doors, the Hendrix, fizzled through death or overdose or couldn't handle fame. He's a pretty strong guy, Bob Dylan. He basically has been through a lot. We forgot to mention that he was holed up for 6 months or a year. He fell off his motorcycle, didn't he?